So today I'm going to go through ranges in a very advanced way. And I'm just going to use the most recent part of Bitcoin's move because it's always fun to do just like the most recent stuff, kind of keeps us up with what's going on in Bitcoin. And yeah, okay. So when we are looking at ranges, and there's like the $1,000,000 question of how do we see ranges better? And it's just kind of something everybody always asks me is, help me with ranges. And I kind of stay away from it because it just kind of takes a certain level of knowledge to understand it. And yeah, it's definitely like a higher level form of training, right? So you have to really know everything before you really dig into ranges because, well, and you'll see why with what we go through. You just kind of have to know a lot more of the advanced TA to follow ranges very well. So, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply just start this by walking through how this range is developed and what happens with it. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll be able to pick out ranges perfectly and see like every kind of part of what constitutes as a range, what breaks a range, how you adjust ranges, when ranges transfer into other ranges, and so forth. So ranges are always dictated by ladder points, the very top and the very bottom. So I've just kind of put a 1 and a 1 on the screen here to illustrate that. And I'm going to be drawing kind of these boxes to illustrate what range we're in, kind of just in the current moment. We'll use a nice blue. That's kind of a nice soft color. Okay, cool. So we got blue and yellow. That's not that soft, but okay, it'll do anyways. So this defines the tip of the first range, and this defines the bottom of the first range. Now, if we were to go and wick above this range here like this, we would actually be moving this number 1 to there and redefining the range. And then by doing that, it kind of changes the architecture of the entire chart. So we're just going to go kind of candle by candle here. At this point, we have our second range developed on the top. So now we're working in our first range. And if you were to make a manual on, like if you had to do something where you weren't allowed to use pictures and you had to describe a range, where you would say, well, ranges are nothing but trend points. So your base and reach point are actually just your tips and the tips of your ladder points are your trends. So like 1 and 2 here would create a trend, right? And then when 2 gets tested, this could possibly create a range trend to 3. So that could possibly be like the creation of a range trend. But yeah, again, if you had no pictures and somebody asked you to explain it just verbally, this is what you would do. You would say that the tips and the tips being the top or the bottom side, when you have them, those are your base and reach points for trends, and those are your actual starting of ranges. So every base point is a range and every tip point is another range. And then further from that secondary tip point where range 2 starts, that would be the base of number 2 would be your range trend or your interior range, which would be then going to the number 3, which would be the reach, which would be your third range. So yeah, kind of a bit of a tongue twister there. But anyways, we've got 2 ranges here. And this is where you would go and you'd say, oh, okay, look, we went over that. This is often where you see an origin level created on the charts. And actually this now has to adjust to here because this is actually the start of the second range is here. We thought it was here, but now it's here. And interestingly enough, with ranges, when they do this, often what happens is you have an origin created. So this is going to be on a time frame that we're not on right now, but a lower time frame, possibly a 15 or a 5, maybe even hourly for all I know. I'm not sure. I haven't checked. But anyways, the breaking of a range often creates an origin level. So that's a really good tidbit to keep in your mind, that when a range breaks, it's kind of key. So like if I was to just go here and be like, oh, look, here's a very awesome hack that I've never really shared anybody. Here's a ladder point. Did we go under it? We did right there. I bet you there's an origin right here. Aha, right? So that's a really interesting quick little tip to always make you look at your charts faster, is that, hey, I just broke a range. That's going to be an origin, right? So really, really neat. So one of the first things I'm going to mention here is floating ranges. Now, if we were to take this back here, you're going to have another thing that happens when this range is created. You're going to have this here. So this number 2 here, if you wick over this, you know what that means. That means we create a floating level on the bottom. So we can mark these 2 right here. And we're not going to change timeframes too much. We're just going to kind of try to do this all in one time frame. Oh, look, we have a floating level. That in theory should be your perfect buy spot. Let's see what happens. Oh, there we go. Look at that. Whole level, bang. And it's perfect, right? Because it is a range that got broken. And when you break a range, you create a floating level. So it really gives you that like picture perfect accuracy. And now the cool thing about this is done. Da, da, da. We have, oh wait, no, that didn't work. I gotta do that again. Okay, we have range number 2 on the bottom now. So really interestingly enough, now if I was not even to use these pinpoints, just like 1 to 2, 1 to 2, you have your trend work that should be perfect. So this should actually extricate or just remove any doubt of any trend work because you're attaching trends to ranges, right? So I'm gonna keep going here and just see what happens next. Okay, so we actually have to do this again. So now we should technically have another floating level, right? Because we broke over that. We have this here. You probably have to get lower in time frame here. I'm assuming there's something in here, but that's okay. We're only staying on this time frame. But now we have our second range here. We still don't have this range, but that also could be because it's precedented by the origin level that got created back here. So it's really interesting the way when you have a range and you're looking at a range, and it's really interesting what happens with these wicks when they pass ladder points. Like that's the key. If it passes a ladder point, it gives you everything you need. So like when it passed this ladder point, it gave us our floating level, and it also gave us our origin here, right? So now it becomes this really interesting queue of events. So like in theory, then at the same thing, like if we wick below this, you should technically use that as a buy. If we wick below it, I'm not sure what's going to happen here. So we're still okay. Oh, okay, good. We actually wicked past it. Let's see where this actually ends up. So yeah, you actually have this here, and this is actually now we're moving into our third range here. So now you'd have your your standard range trend here. You'd have your range trend here like this, and maybe this is even lower time frame. Oopsies. Maybe this is even lower time frame here, but not what we're doing right now. We're just using this time frame, but you would have to go and find like, I'm sure this is the hourly or whatever it is. But now we have a third range in play. So now we have this guy here. So when we broke below this, we should be using this as a floating level. Again, floating levels and untested. That's tested actually. So we can't use this because that's tested. And we did create a new range right here in the move. So actually it should in theory be this as a floating level. And this is the third range. Now, the only reason I'm not using the one above, I'm not sure if it's going to hit that one above. I think I would rather go, oopsies. I think I'd rather go for this one on the bottom. And the reason I say that is because that other level is tested. So with a floating level, it has to be untested, right? Like this was an untested level. It was perfect. It gapped straight to it. This is tested, this part of the move. So that's tested, and that's where your range gets created. You've tested your hold level, you've moved up against it, you've rejected it, you've tested your range. So now, ideally, you have a floating level. The floating level breaks the point of the move, and this should be your next short. Well, let's see what happens. It's pretty perfect. Yeah, it's perfect. Short right there, right to the move, right? And then, if we were to break below this again, like if all of a sudden we were to go below 2 and, we have to readjust this 2 or something like that, then we'd create the next floating level would be like here, right? And so forth and so forth. So every time you break below one of these wicks, you create that floating level. And now, actually, I just want to go forward one more candle. We're still above. Okay, we're still above. Good. Okay, so now we have 3 and we have 3 on the bottom as well. So I'm just going to copy this, put it here. We have 3 and 3 on the bottom here. So let's move forward a candle here, forward, let's see what happens. So technically, actually, this should be the perfect spot to enter. And no, because we're not on a floating level yet. My mistake. We don't have a floating level yet. We actually have to break over this ladder point if we want to do that. See what happens here. You actually just lose the move. Okay, so that's it. And yeah, your range just kind of unfolds like that. Now, when you have a range like this, number one, I want to almost call this like an origin range, although it's not an origin range. I would say it's like the original range, not tying that to something I would use as a theory, but the original range. When that happens and you go below it, you're going to get something interesting happen, and it'll happen on one of two things. When you go below this and recreate this number 1 here, you are typically going to, if this stabilizes and remakes the range and gets back up into these areas, you're typically going to, when you break this and you kind of adjust that range, you're going to have a massive move up, because when you establish your range, you usually have like a big move afterwards, right? So like if this holds and we don't just dump here, you're going to have a massive move up. And the reason that is because you've just reestablished your number 1, right? Like you won't have a massive move up off of just breaking, an interior part of the range, but actually breaking the range and resetting this to 1. Now you've got 1, 2, 3, and only a 1 on this side, right? So like usually if this holds, like I don't know if it's going to hold, but if it does, it'll create a huge move up. Hasn't held yet. This is actually the start of the range now, but it's okay still. It's still kind of holding. And now what we would do is we would say, okay, well, we broke below this, so we should have a floating level. This one's tested. So I would either say it's going to be here now because this range just started, or here. You could probably actually take both shorts. So you actually would want to take both of these trades here. Let me just delete these. And I'm going to pin that to this. If this holds it down, obviously the floating level, like, because this is already tested, this one's already tested. If this holds it down, obviously it's just going to keep moving down, right? But you could take both of these trades, but you know, you should actually be definitely looking at this and this as a trade for this, because you know what, you've just reestablished your number one, and if this holds, it's going to have a, you know, a decent size move up. See what happens here. Perfect. It hit the range. Yep, hit the floating level, and that's because it broke below that. And it creates the perfect floating level. So in order to find floating levels, now when this happens, you know that the move is going to break down. In order to find floating levels, it's all about being able to mark your range and move with it and understand how like a range transfer works, because you have this here, it transfers to this, it goes to this, that holds, your trend is still in play. Now you have the third range. You even kind of start having range 4 in this, like a fourth range here. You could say the third range is like all of that stuff there. And this would be even like the fourth range here now. So like you have all this stuff on the bottom, and you only really have this. Maybe you're establishing the second part of the range now on this side. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, this is like the second range right here, something like this, right? Let's see what happens here. Actually, now it's here. Hit that float again, which is fine. You can do that backtest trend from the original range, which isn't like a big thing here. Is that it? Are we current on the move? Oh, we're like current on the move, aren't we? Oh, cool.
Yep.
Oh, so that's awesome. We were able to break that whole thing down. Current in the move. So, and even like right now, when you break above this, right, like you're kind of in that same thing here, because when you break above this, you're kind of at that floating level, right? Like you're going to kind of want to take this trade here and here because it did break above that ladder point. So you are taking that float, which is what you're seeing here. Typically, I'm going to take the body of these, but at the same time, we're only using one time frame here, which is the 4 hours. So to get this accurate without changing time frames is kind of a feat in its own, right? Like we've got pretty impeccable accuracy here without even changing time frames, but that's just because we understand the way these ranges are working. So yeah, it's really neat when you can see how a range transfers, and that range transfer happens when you break above those points. So, you know, this can stay number one because we never broke above it. Oh, actually, you see, I made a mistake there. This has actually got to be like this. You actually created this here as the range 1, and this needs to be 2, which is fine. It's just adjusting numbers. It's not really that big of a mistake. It's still chronologically the same thing in sequence. It's just where that range 1 is different. Now you've got an origin level instead. But it's interesting that when you do have a range and you do wick past it, that creates an origin. So you're no longer concerned about the range, you're concerned about the origin. So then you're working in trends, right? Then you're working in where your floating levels get hit. So then you're working like this. So you're working with trends like this to break out of accumulation. And then you're also working with trades where your level is hit. So you would be like this to this one right here, right? Like that would be your range trend because that float was hit on a different time frame, and that would be your range trend, what's holding the move down. So now you've got breakout of distribution, range trend, break over the move. So that's the two differences between those trends too, because you have this is breakout of accumulation, start a cycle, this very interior trend. The range trend, which always happens as the base point off of the float. Not always off the float, but the test of the base point, right? Like the test of the level. Usually it's typically a float, but it can be a reverse. It can be a hold level, but the test of the level to the next accumulation candle creates your range trend. And then that range trend, the reason why we call them range trends, which is I've never talked about this before actually, before this video, the reason we call them range trends is because it's breaking the range. So when the trend breaks, it breaks the range. So little Easter egg that was never supposed to be released, but a really cool one. And that's why I've always called them range trends, because when you break that range again, you're breaking the range trend. When it breaks a range. So that's a really neat, like it gives you a lot of power to understand that. So I'm going to go through this example one more time, but a little differently, just to kind of illustrate it even a little better. So what I want to do is I'm actually going to keep the replayer tool like this, and I'm going to try this with only the pen tool. I'm going to try something new here. I'm going to use the pen tool, and we're going to go that's good, but I want to change it to pink just because I like pink. So it's my favorite color. Pink and green. Green probably because of the Irish in me, and pink because, well, I just love pink. So what we're gonna do is we're going to start here, and wherever I have a straight line, I'm gonna do straight lines and plus signs. Wherever I have a straight line is a current active range. So, or a current active, we'll say that current active range. So like right here's a current active range, right there's a current active range. When I give it a plus sign here, that means it's broken and no longer used. So this one is here and this one is here. So how like we first started. This one is gone at this moment here. So this plus sign is no longer in play. And let's keep going here. And this is no longer in play because now it's here. And let's keep going. And this is now no longer in play because it is where are we stopping? Because it is right here, right? You have 1, 2, 1, 2. The range is holding. It's good. Oh, this is no longer in play. Oh, whoa, back up a second here. Let's redo that. 2 candles. This is no longer in play. This still technically is, I believe. Next candle. This is no longer in play now, right? So you can see wherever the plus signs are, you no longer have a range. And actually on the top that we found out earlier, this is no longer in play here. So now we actually just have the number 1 right here. And this was no longer in play, right? This was it, and then it's no longer in play. Bounces down. Interesting about this level is you see accumulation happen when you pass the float. Because this was that wick of the move, that's where that's going to go. And in order to attack, okay, so we need to mark this range here. That's a range. And that's kind of all encompassed with this one right here. So we can actually just draw this one diagonally a little bit and this one right here. So when we break this one, we are going to go back target whatever's untested. That's tested. That's tested. That's tested. This one's not. So when we broke this, we're going to go test this one here. When we break that, that's where that gap gets created. Still delete some of these lines, too many lines. Oh, that's too far. Let's see. You pretty much gap straight to it. You just gap right to it. And then this one is there because this one is not. This is still active. Now you have this as well. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 on top, 1 on the bottom, 2 on the bottom. Oh, that's gone. So technically this should hold it down. There's no other floats. If it doesn't hold it down, you're moving up. Now you have this here. That's near number 2. And there, see how it breaks above this, gaps right back up. Technically you should go over this now and create, you know, this or this as your float now on the move. Let's see what happens. A lot of lines. Okay, there it is. That's gone. So we still have this range here. This range is still in play. One more. That's there. So now you have 1, 2, 3, 4 on that side here. Now let's move this to here. I think it attacks the actual wick of this move, if I remember correctly. We just saw this anyways. That's how I know it's kind of cheating, but that's okay. And so then that creates your bounce right there, right? And that's why you have that bounce there, is because it's broke, right? So, you know, without drawing, how we first did this was drawing it out with the clean way, with trends and numbers and boxes. You know, the second way is a little more hectic and chaotic, but it shows you the transferring of the range. The first part of that little demonstration I did there would have been how the range actually looks from a TA standpoint, but this shows the logic flow of what's happening with it, right? Like how that range is being developed and moved, and why it's doing so.